So what is at stake right now in Washington? Let's bring in our front bench. Former BC Premier Christy Clark is here. She's a senior advisor with Bennett Jones. Marco Mendicino is former chief of staff to Prime Minister Mark Carney and a former Liberal cabinet minister. He's now a senior counsel and strategic advisor for Castles. CTV political analyst and former Conservative industry minister James Moore is with us. He's now a policy advisor at Edelman. And Corey Teneycke was Ontario Premier Doug Ford's campaign manager and former director of communications for Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He's now CEO of Rubicon Strategy. Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday evening. Lots for us to unpack on multiple fronts. I'm going to start with Washington and this trip in particular tomorrow. Christy, is it about avoiding disaster or actually trying to make gains for the Prime Minister?
I don't think there's going to be much accomplished in a short meeting that they're going to have. I mean, these meetings on the sometimes you can do a longer meeting on the margin of a big confab where you're meeting about something, but this is about FIFA, and it's going to be a big, a completely different focus. I think it's going to be hard to get the president to fully engage on these issues in this context. I think, Carney will probably do the best that he can, but I don't think we should have huge hopes for it. Every one of these is relationship building. That's good. The president of Mexico will be there. That's good. I mean, those relationships really matter. But my view of this has always been that President Trump, cagey negotiator that he is likely to leave Canada for the very last. And so when he says he may not renegotiate the deal at all, I think that's very real. Or if we just end up waiting for a long time until the very end of the rest of all of his tariff work that he's doing, I think that's a very real likelihood for Canada too. And it's better if we get a deal done at the end of the day, but it will be at the end of the day if we get a deal.
James, do you think it is possible or real that the president could walk away from CUSMA? I mean, it's not nothing. It's such a significant part of why our economy remains as insulated as it is. Not to say that the damage, on certain sectors isn't very punctuated, but overall, because 85% of the trade is still covered by CUSMA, it has definitely led to a lot of resilience. Do you think the possibility exists that that disappears?
No, I think he'll threaten it, but I don't think it'll actually happen. And the president doesn't actually have the power to unilaterally collapse CUSMA. It has to go back to Congress. And as you saw in the special elections in Tennessee and the other elections that happened last month, that the grip of the president on Congress is not particularly strong. Polymarket has it about 80%. The Democrats would win back control of Congress. And the president can't unilaterally just pull the CUSMA agreement out from underneath the American economy. This is a trilateral agreement, and the process to actually undo it and withdraw is complex. So, and you saw business leaders one by one going before Congress and making presentations to the president at great risk to their sort of reputational the heat that they could get from the president over social media to say, look, this is an agreement that you negotiated, that you asked for, that you signed, that you delivered, that has been of enormous accretive benefit to our companies and to the North American platform and to these American companies. So I think Donald Trump will be a tough guy right up until the very end, should we get to that. He will certainly try to squeeze Canada for some kind of concessions that he could brag about and boast about. Often the symbolic victories are more important than substantive ones, and often the ones that he thinks that are substantive are actually not real wins for the American economy. So you're kind of shadowboxing with the impossible unpredictability of Donald Trump, which is why I think for Canada, the long game is to keep the long game, and don't do anything in a very quick and hastened way.
James's point is well taken. That and certainly if you've been listening or reading any of the testimonies so far, all the USMCA hearings that are going on, Marco, there are like a surprising number. Finally, it feels like of businesses who are saying like, keep it. This is actually good for us and for the American economy. At the same time, you have this juxtaposition yesterday in the Oval Office of the CEOs of the big auto companies like Stellantis, like GM, standing next to the president and just throwing adulation his way for the wonderful tariffs and all the production that has brought on side to the United States. Like, what do we take from that as Canadians?
Well, let's start with symbolism, and I'm going to pick up on the juxtaposition that James just articulated. I do think it is quite symbolic that tomorrow Prime Minister Mark Carney is going to Washington to celebrate the trilateral hosting of FIFA, which is the largest sporting event in the world, will be watched by the most number of eyeballs in the world, along with the United States and Mexico. And I might disagree a little bit with James on substance. I think substance is important when it comes to the trade relationship. And that's one of the reasons why the Prime Minister continues to tout that we have still the best deal in the world when it comes to the effective tariff rate. Now, that said, there is a lot of uncertainty. And as we've discussed before, there have been fits and spurts when it comes to the negotiation cycle, which is why it's important that Canada continues to project that we will protect workers in the most impacted sectors of our economy, that we will hold fast when it comes to protecting the principles of the trade agreement that we have with the United States and Mexico, regardless of how it's branded, and that patience is a cornerstone of the Prime Minister and the government strategy right now.
I totally get that, Corey, and I understand, like, strategically how that makes sense. Waiting it out makes sense. But this week we have ample evidence of the pain in the interim, right? And, like, what that means on the ground in 1,000 layoffs at Algoma Steel, the shuttering of a lumber operation in British Columbia, more concerned about that happening on the East Coast as well. Like, how do you balance those things? Like, and are they doing a good job at it?
I don't think there's any easy path here, but I will point out, while there have been job losses in Canada and the pain is real here, the U.S. just received more data that we're in their 9th consecutive month of declines in employment and manufacturing in the U.S. The U.S. tariff policy, the president's tariff policy, isn't just hurting Canada and other countries; it's hurting themselves at the same time. There isn't an auto company in North America that can produce a single car on its own. These are all things that we do together in a very integrated supply chain that we've built up over 40 years. And the disruption of these tariffs is hurting Canada for sure, particularly aluminum, steel, autos, softwood lumber. But the uncertainty that U.S. trade policy is putting into the market is probably hurting us more. So even the unaffected areas that aren't facing tariffs are certainly experiencing the same sort of investment chill that we're seeing in the U.S. as well. At the end of the day, the president's trade policy may be his political undoing.
I have to do a 180 because we were just talking to John Rustad, the outgoing leader of the BC Conservative Party. I have, like, BC royalty on this panel, so it's incumbent on me to get everyone. I know Corey's done a lot of work out there as well. Christy, I'll start with you. As you saw the last 24 hours unfold, which were dramatic by BC standards, but by Canadian standards too, like, what's been going through your mind, and what do you think the future of that party is?
Well, first, that was a very good interview you did with him, Vashi. I thought you got more out of him than I've ever seen him give in an interview, so well done on that. John Rustad we're all kind of reliving 1991 in British Columbia because that was a moment when the Liberal Party just re-emerged with a new leader, and there hadn't been a Liberal in the legislature before, and they got there, they became official opposition out of nowhere, and then the leader fell apart and the party fell apart, and the thing was saved at the end of the day because a new leader came in who was, Gordon Campbell, very competent, well-known, former mayor, very successful in his job, and became the leader of the BC Liberal Party. And then we governed for 15, 16 years in British Columbia. So, good on John Rustad stepping up and starting a whole new party, riding the Pierre Poilievre coattails as long as he did. But, just like Gordon Wilson, I'm not sure he necessarily had the skills to be able to take that next step and turn this into a real thing. Now, who knows whether or not that'll happen? Everything will depend on who they choose as leader and whether or not that leader is able to bring together everyone in the province who doesn't want to vote NDP. If they fail to do that, and this is my partisanship showing, we are going to have another 4 years of New Democrats, absolutely guaranteed. So, if you care about the economy in British Columbia, this is a pretty important issue.
Is that inability to bring together disparate voices or disparate viewpoints under this big, we're not the NDP umbrella, like, ultimately why you think James Rustad failed as leader?
A combination of things. I don't know that he had the chops to do it himself. The interpersonal skills or the heft and weight of his personality and his charisma. I think he frankly lacked both. He was sort of the front rank of the second rank of leaders, and you need a first rank leader. We have in our system, of course, we have a parliamentary system, but we have presidential style politics. And to Christie's point, it's all about the leader. It's all about a leader's ability to draw people in and to get them focused on an agenda and a platform that makes sense. And there's a lot on the table for British Columbians who are of the broad free enterprise mindset to rally around, right? The Comox decision and the insecurity that exists in the investment community to invest in creating jobs in British Columbia because of the uncertainty about land claims and where the courts are going, the private property ownership question, the flight of capital and investment, Nutrien going to Vancouver, Washington instead of Vancouver, British Columbia. There's plenty on the table here in substantive policy for someone who would be cultured and thoughtful, who could sell in the Okanagan, but also Vancouver Island and Prince George, and do very well in the city of Vancouver. So the broad free enterprise coalition is now fractured. It's not just the BC Conservative Party. There's still, there are two independents. There are two people sitting in this one BC party, which is just antagonistic towards First Nations. Then you have three independents. Like the broad free enterprise party is fractured and broken apart. The only thing that brings it together is a compelling leader with a thoughtful platform that speaks to people, as opposed to just being anti-NDP. The public has to want you to win, and you have to put something in the window that's meaningful. John Rustad couldn't do that. Somebody new could.
What ultimately do you think led to the unraveling of his leadership, Marco? And how soon do you think David Eby goes to an election?
Well, I would defer to the Royal Court of St. Christie and St. James for the pulse of what's happening on the ground in BC. But I think it's exactly as was articulated, which is the inability of John Rustad to pull together a coalition that could compete against David Eby. And I actually think that is an opportunity for David Eby, given the economic agenda that has been laid out by the Prime Minister, which is not to say that it's easy. Certainly, we've seen over the past week with the signing of the MOU between Ottawa and Alberta that there can be friction. But I think a strong leader who has the advantage of not having a really compelling alternative in his province in BC, can marshal the forces of a broad coalition that cares about the economy, that cares about getting energy and resources to market, that cares about creating jobs, but that also cares about the environment as a way to drive cooperation. And when I think about the central thesis that the Prime Minister is showcasing, it is that Canada works, and that the way that it works is by stitching together the regional and disparate economies from coast to coast to coast, which again is not easy. But when you have a premier who isn't facing a strong opposition, then he has the ability to dip into a bit of the well of political goodwill to forge compromise. And so that would be my urging. And certainly by doing that, not only do I think we shore up confidence when it comes to our domestic economy, but it also puts the country on a much stronger footing when it comes to renegotiating trade around the world, including with our closest allies south of the border.
It's hard to overstate how wild a swing it's been since the election in BC. Corey, you've run a lot of campaigns. The story out of that election was David Eby almost lost. And the story now is he might be in such a good position, he wants to go to the polls much sooner. Like, what do you think went wrong for John Rustad? And do you think the party is salvageable under a different leader?
Well, I think you saw the party pulling itself apart on really secondary or third tier issues, as opposed to focusing on the big stuff. I think Eby is probably deceptively vulnerable if the BC Conservative Party can actually get its act together. When you look at things like development and pipelines, there's a huge number of votes there. Pushing 70% of the electorate is in favor of that sort of development, maybe with some caveats or asterisks on that. But overall, you're dealing with a supermajority of people who want to see things move forward. You're also seeing issues like cost of living and jobs in the economy generally driving the issue set. And if you're to add another one, it would probably be crime. So that's a very favorable issue environment for Conservatives. If you can find a leader that can focus on the big stuff and then put on a shelf some of the smaller issues that tend to tear at the core of a Conservative free market coalition, then I think you've got a good basis for a winning campaign. But I guess we're going to see in the coming weeks whether, as Christy said, a leader that can do that emerges, that has enough strength to pull those threads together and to talk about the big stuff rather than getting sidelined on marginal stuff.
And Vashi, let's not forget how important this
yeah.
is to the national agenda, because if British Columbia stands in the way of pipelines, it stands in the way of all of that resource development. If British Columbia isn't ruled by someone who wants to cooperate with the federal government, and at the moment it's not, it makes it very, very difficult for the rest of the country to accomplish the goals we've set.
Okay, I got to leave it on that note. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate it. BC politics never boring, as you all know. Christy Clark, James Moore, Marco Mendicino, and Corey Tenek, our front bench.